demystifying the whole nature of running a Dungeons and Dragons game, because I hope you will run a Dungeons and Dragons game. I think that there's not enough games in the world. There's not enough stable games. And I'm going to write an article called The 12 Rules of Gaming Life, and based on some other rules that I've seen before. And one of the rules that will be in there, and I wanted to tease that today, is that act as if you are responsible for the quality of the game. And so I think whether you're a player, whether you're a DM, whether you're just an observer, whether you're talking about D&D online, the quality of discussion, the attention that you bring to sustainable games, the attention you bring to creative fun, the attention you bring to inclusive play, all of these things raise the quality of games, and takes gaming to that next level that things like movies or sometimes books and things like that can't achieve. It's not that it's better, it's just that it's different. It's different because it's an active form of media. It's a participatory and social form of entertainment. So I hope you'll take it seriously, and that's one of the rules that'll be in my 12 rules of gaming life. So look for that in the future. Thank you very much if you're joining me today. I hope you are. I hope you'll participate today if you're joining me, either or joining this later. If you're not watching the live stream, if you're picking it up on YouTube or Twitch later, I really hope you'll go ahead and leave a comment down on the tavern wall. I would love to respond to you. I try as hard as I can to give the thoughtful response to anybody who might be watching these videos. So yeah, I hope you'll respond, and I hope you'll chat a little bit today if you're catching this live. So thank you for joining me again. I stream every Saturday at noon Eastern time in the US. So I hope you'll join and participate. All right. So what is today's game all about? Today's stream all about? So two things I really want to talk about today. And when I say talk about, I'm thinking through these things as much as I am creating them. I have some canned discussion, but this is sort of a live creation stream. So I want to, I'm going to today talk about lore-based encounters and environmental encounters. And there's a reason for that. I am currently running a Rime of the Frostmaiden campaign, and I have a big encounter coming up. I'll tell you where the players are and how this lends to that design discussion today. So what I have are the players themselves, and that's this is Foundry Tabletop, by the way. This is the virtual tabletop VTT. If you haven't heard it before, this is a virtual tabletop that I use. It's a server that I run myself. I really enjoy it. I had used Roll20. I don't have any skin in the game on any of these, other than to say just whatever you choose. The reason why I've chosen Foundry is, one, I like the interface. I like the features better. And I like that I can run it myself, and I'm free from having to do things like pay for uploads, upload limits and things like that. Although I'm just pushing it off to another location because I'm hosting it myself on a server that I run. All right. So anyway, the party is here in Icewind Dale, which I zoom out. You see all of Icewind Dale here. This is an interesting place to run a campaign. And actually, I guess I haven't. If you're thinking about running Icewind Dale, or if you're already running it, I'd love to hear your opinions on it. But one of the interesting things, quasi-interesting, or that make this different from running other campaigns, is the scale of it. Like at one point, you zoom out on this map, and you think, oh my gosh, this is absolutely massive. But it's really not. Each one of these squares is just 1 mile, which makes it ironic and different from running a module like, let's say, Lost Mines of Phandelver, Lost Mines of Phandelver, because the map is so much different. And I think people have gotten used to looking at that map and thinking about these wide expanses of areas. But at a mile per square, excuse me, I hit my mic there. Things like Easthaven, let's say this town here, Easthaven, actually on map to scale, this dot is about to scale of what Easthaven would be. It would take up most of that mile. Many of the other lakes as well. So it has this combined ironic or different style of play, because on one hand, these distances are extremely short. The players have gone, they have this little measurement tool. These players have only gone 7 miles or so from Easthaven, where they started out. But at the same time, the movement is much slower. Typically in a D&D campaign setting, again, like Lost Mines of Phandelver, the distance that the player party can travel in a day is something like 25-24 miles. So and having actually been in the military, that's generous. You can do that, but doing that every day can be a little rough. But regardless, in Icewind Dale, depends on your mode of travel. So a typical travel mode in Icewind Dale is about a half mile per hour. So in a typical 8-hour day, players can cover about 4 miles a day. That makes this an interesting campaign to run if you're running environmental based encounters, which is one of the reasons I'll get to that today, because this 7-mile trek is a 2-day journey, which is something you would absolutely not get in most other campaigns. And the reasoning for that is supposed to be deep snow. It's supposed to be sort of a long winter that's happening here where the sun has not shined in 2 years. And I've seen a lot of people comment on the science behind that. I know I'm a microbiologist, but you just have to ignore that. If you get into science, there's no end to that pit if you start getting into science and D&D. So just go with it. So it creates an interesting set of challenges, and in this game, it creates the opportunity for environmental challenges in ways that just are not present in other games. I will say, I think there are more opportunities than we realize for wilderness encounters in D&D, but the general difficulties are that we have a hard time making it count over time. First of all, most of us are not experienced in the wilderness. We're not survivalists. Some of us have seen a survival show, and we imagine ourselves survivalists, but that's not quite the same. So if you spend any time in nature, again, I was in the military, the number of things that can go wrong and are numerous. Most of them are annoying, not exactly life-threatening, but a few can be life-threatening. But the problem with designing environmental encounters in D&D, in D&D 5th edition specifically, is the recovery mechanism. And that's not to say it's bad. It's just that survival tends to be a long-term prospect. Day after day, a grind that sort of is about resource management. You sort of get your endurance or your health gets reduced over time, and that grinds on day after day after day. That's the best or the most sensible design when it comes to most environmental challenges that people think of. But in D&D, every night you rest, you recover all of your hit points. So who cares if you tumble down a hill one day of a journey and you lose 6 hit points? You really don't care. An hour rest is gonna recover that for you. You're going to recover those hit points at night. So the way you design environmental encounters in D&D it necessitates a different methodology. So what I'll say is, so where I think they should be pushed off is you should relate the environmental counters to the progress of a player's goal. That's one option. And the other is the environment should play a significant part in how other encounters in the wilderness are set up. Not drawback. It's just one of the functions of D&D is to be a generic role-playing game, is to not have an opinion on things like what does the environment look like all the time, or what does how does lore integrate into the world. And I'll talk about lore-based encounters as well, because we have an upcoming big skeleton encounter, and I want to talk a little bit about how D&D doesn't give you an opinion on what that actually means. I'll get to that in a bit. But let me start again with this idea of an environmental counter. So D&D is trying to stay agnostic as to sort of how difficult environments can be, how much that's left up to the game master, and that's not apparent. And because it isn't given to you, often that's not a tool that GMs or players can adopt until much later. So I'm going to leave apart that sort of long-term adventure design with environmental counters and talk in favor of how environmental counters affect combat encounters. Yeah, that's what most people think about when they think about environmental encounters in D&D. You tend to roll on a random table. You come up with 4 moose or a bear or some goblins that you run across, and people have a tendency to run these as if it's a room that you just run into an empty room and there's 5 goblins standing there, and you roll initiative and you go for it. But environments, especially all environments, including dungeons actually, but external environments provide you with the opportunity to set the stage with a story a little bit more than you would have in any other encounter. So what I mean by that means that terrain can play a significant role in a couple things. One, it can affect movement. Two, it can affect opportunities to affect the combat. So we're in Icewind Dale, for instance. If you were to get into an encounter, a fight in the mountains, and you notice a group before they notice you, you could theoretically go forward and do things like create an avalanche to attack that group, or let them get lost in the wilderness, or with a fog cloud spell. Or you can use the environment in ways that are creative, that are not just you dealing hit points and them dealing hit points to you, and then see who goes by attrition, who loses first. So the environment creates a much more rich environment and context for you. Also, the environment creates an opportunity to tell the story about how these encounters interact with the environment. So let's say you run into a animal encounter, whether that be a bear or something like that, or even an owl bear. What's the owl bear doing? Very often it just charges and attacks the player. But there's a lot more to it. The owl bear could be hungry. You could notice it's extremely thin and gaunt, and it's sniffing at the air at your packs or your rations. That might give the players a chance to sort of decide they want to kill it or not kill it for its fur, or use an animal handling check to sort of distract it as they get away. There's a lot more in that, just on those few options that I'm throwing out there, that the players can engage with. It's much more than roll initiative. The players might often choose to roll initiative, but that's up to the players. It could have a youngling nearby. There's a cub or something in the woods, and the first thing the players might see is the cub, and it might occur to them, maybe there's a mama around, maybe I should get out of here. There's lots of things they can do. Although here, a good piece of gaming advice from a long time game mastering is I would be very cautious about throwing cubs or baby animals out there, because players invariably want to adopt them, and then you're stuck. Like, what do you do with this cub or this puppy, and they're about to go into a dungeon? How do they take care of it? As a GM, you're often stuck between threatening this young creature, which I don't like to do. I actually stay away from that, or making it go along and it's sort of immortal and can't be hurt. If you choose to do all that, that's fine, but make it an informed decision that that's how you want that encounter to go. All right. And other things. Let's say you run into goblins in the field. What are they doing? Maybe they're camping. Maybe they're fighting with other goblins. Maybe they're stuck in the mud. And instead of a combat encounter, the players can choose to either ambush them while they're at a disadvantage, or even offer to help them. Maybe they're divvying up treasure from their last campaign. Any of those things are good to go. It's called a technique called in media res. And that's often implied. In media res means in middle of the action. That's a narrative term. And often people interpret that as the players being in the middle of the action. So they arrive at the dungeon and they see a monster charging out towards them. So you begin in media res, and in the middle of the action coming at them. But that doesn't have to always be the case. In media res could be about the world or the encounter that they're running across. So if you run across an environmental encounter where goblins just got buried in an avalanche, or they're stuck in mud, or they're in the middle of crossing a river, that's a great one. Let's say the players are coming down a trail. They see a bunch of goblins crossing a river. Half of them are across a thin log, and they have to balance to get across. Half of the goblins are on one side of the river, half on the other side of the river, this side of the river. Then they begin to debate: are these goblins going to attack us if they catch up, or find us out here? Are they going to cause some other mayhem? Are they innocent? If so, do we attack them now while they're at a disadvantage? Is there paladin in the party, or somebody who's honorable? Is that honorable for them? There's lots of debate that can happen because of how you set up these adventures and in the environment. And so that leads us to the environmental effects of the encounter. So there's an adventure called the Lost Mines of Phandelver. I've referenced that several times. Excuse me. It's probably It's probably the most famous encounter in all of campaign in all of D&D. There's an opening encounter to that called Goblin Ambush, and this is very light spoilers. I don't think it's going to be major spoilers, but it's basically goblins. Players run down a road. They're going there for some reasons I won't get into, but they get to a point. They see some disturbance in the road. They take a peek at it, and when they're taking a peek, 4 goblins just jump them and attack them. Now there's so much variance. It's often lamented about because the players are first level, and this is one that people have said that either the players blow through it like that, or the players are slaughtered. There's a total party kill. Or people have talked about total party kills on that adventure. I think environment plays a huge role in that, and what the assumptions of the DM are. Now I've run it all kinds of ways where basically the goblins are just standing there to the players surprising the goblins. I had one party that really pushed me. They wanted me to optimize. They were over optimized as a party, and they were really interested in optimized play. In other words, they wanted things to be as tough as it possibly could be because they were making their characters as tough as they possibly could be. And I don't advise players to do that because the DM's always going to win that discussion. But I was like, okay, I tried to wave them off that, but they wanted it. So talking about environmental adventure. So all I did was set up a road that saying the brush, because this is not a civilized area, the brush off of the small trail is very thick. So it's difficult terrain. So in other words, it costs 2 feet of movement for every foot of movement that they actually do. So it halves players' movement. The goblins were hidden up there at range. They had things like caltrops hidden in, or spikes basically, hidden in the grass at different points to stop the players when they try to get to them. And they had these small trails dug around so they could use their goblins. You can use a bonus action to hide every turn. And they had foliage to hide behind. So they could literally hide. So it was every turn the goblins could hide behind foliage, attack with advantage, because if you can't see your attacker, they have advantage against you. The players would try to rush them. They were at half movement to get to them, so they couldn't get them in a round or two. They would hit these call traps, these spikes, and it would make them stop their progress if they made any progress at all. The goblins would hide after they would shoot, so the players couldn't see them, and then they get advantage on the next round. And that combat lasted 3 rounds, and I wiped the entire party. And then we rediscussed how the adventure was going to go and why players may not want to ask me to kill them so strongly. But that was an environmental encounter. The things about the environment setting up so the goblins can use their bonus action to hide because they had foliage around them. The environment set up so that the players had a restricted movement when the goblins had ranged attacks. The environment set up so they could hide things like spikes in the environment. Those are all things that add up to give a little bit more richness to the combat. So I think I have upcoming in this campaign a similar, not problem, but it's something I need to face because, so the setup in this campaign and why I'm getting to this environmental based encounters, because I want to create something more enjoyable and more rich than for an encounter that I have coming up with a bunch of harpies where the players were at. So what's going on is the players, having reached 3rd level, I modified one of the adventures called the Cauldron Cave. So by the way, this is Rime of the Frostmaiden prep. So if you don't want to be spoiled on Rime of the Frostmaiden, don't listen to this stream. Listen to it much later after you've gotten to this. I'm going to be talking about a Cauldron Caves adventure. If you are in my group, shoo, don't watch this video. It's going to spoil everything for the upcoming encounter. If you're in my group, you could probably go back and listen to the first 3 or 4 streams of this channel. I think we've done all the stuff by then, all the stuff that I've talked about already. So it might be interesting for you. So anyway, I use this as a technique. If you use in your virtual tabletop, one of the layers I have is just area map. I have a single icon that I use for the entire party so they can kind of see themselves moving across the map and where they are. But what they are is they're on this quest to go to a hag's cave to recover a magic item called the Prism of Saloon. The reasons aren't that important. It's just so that an artificer can make more food to help alleviate the starvation happening in Icewind Dale right now. Again, this is all my ad. It also carries the additional storyline that this hag is an old rival of this artificer who used to be an adventuring partner to one of the player characters' grandparents back in the day when they adventured in this area. So this is an old family rival who stole a shield that was a family heirloom belonging to the player's grandmother, who is a paladin. So it provides a lot of backstory to go there. So they're there to get an item back that'll help feed the people of the region and to recover an item that belonged to one of the player characters' grandparents. So that's the driver, the hooks for the player characters. So they've gone to Easthaven, this town here, They want to get over to this to the Cauldron Caves, which they know to be here. This artificer had hired a previous adventuring party to go recover this item, but they all disappeared. There's some other lore there, but it's not worth getting into today. Again, I talked about earlier the role that environment plays in this. So it's about, I think I have to do control. Yeah, so about 8 miles total. Actually, if they go this way, yeah, it's about 9 miles total to get to where they are getting to at this Cauldron Cave. So as I said, at the top of the stream, travel in Icewind Dale is much more difficult to do than in normal places. So 9 miles, even at their current pace, because they got 2 miles per day they were able to get. One of the things that got them at third level were these some things called axe beaks. I redesigned the travel in Icewind Dale, by the way. For reason. Actually, let me go into that since I'm talking about, I don't want to reload the applications. Let me talk about travel and travel times in Icewind Dale. I've got this great map off of the Alexandrian that I highly recommend, the alexandrian.net. It did a breakdown of the road distances for all of the places in Icewind Dale. Roads are a little bit better on foot, but I basically broke it down that travel rates per hour, it's 1 mile per hour of travel if you have an axe beak. And I just gave the parties an axe beak. I think it's much less than that in the book. I've reworked all of these for various reasons, but I wanted the player characters to feel like they can get around the environment a lot better once they hit third level. And this is what I did. So 2 miles, I changed it to road speed of 2 miles for the dog sled, which I think is twice the speed, but that they require one hour of rest per hour of movement. So it basically evened this out with the axe beak over time. But the axe beak is 1 mile consistently, whether off land or on land. So that creates, and you can see on foot with snowshoes is a 0.5 mile per hour, which actually is, I think, the book speed. And this is also the book speed without snowshoes. It's 1/4 mile an hour. So they can cover about 4 miles per day. That's bananas. Actually, 2 miles per day. That's bananas. 2 miles per day is just crazy slow. But right now they're at 1 mile per day. So if you go back, and this is a little axe beak art that comes with the book. So if you go back and look at this, if they're going this 9 miles, that's 2 days of travel. Roughly at 4 miles a day, and it's 1 day of travel with the axe beaks. They can push an extra hour. So the party decided they didn't want to get there after a full day of travel. They had to roll if they go over 8 hours of travel, whether they get exhaustion. They didn't want to risk that. So they decided that they were going to camp that night, which is they camped about 1 mile away from the entrance that they know of. And in the middle of the night, this is where we get into environmental encounters. I rolled randomly. They were going to get an encounter. There's a harpy encounter in the book that I decided to keep. And in the middle of the night during one of the watches, the harpies decided to attack them. So the players are, and I happened to roll the barbarian. So what the harpies do is harpies have a special ability. Let's actually go there. If we can, actually, let's keep this one. And hopefully this stays up. Let's go harpies. Oh, I think I need to do one. Harpy monster. So the harpies have a luring song ability where they can charm you if you hear them within 300 feet. So the barbarian is alone on watch at night, and he hears this lithe song sort of come over the snow at night, and he loses his wisdom save, and he begins to walk towards them. So 3 rounds he fails walking towards them, and we ended that session with he succeeded on his last will save just as he's standing right in front of them. He looks up, he sees these harpies, and they're about to attack him. We cut the rest of the party is asleep in the tent. We cut the adventure, and we're going to pick up next session. So what I want to do with this environmental encounter is I don't want them just standing there in the middle of 3 harpies and they attack. I want something in the environment that does something. It makes it more interesting, either restricts movement or adds risk to something. And I think that's what so when we get to environmental encounters, you want to categorize the type of things that you think you can put into an encounter and why does it make it more exciting. I would say something you don't want to do is just give a unavoidable negative to the party. You don't want to just tell the party, oh, you're losing. They do twice the damage because of this, or because there's nothing that they can plot to overcome. You want, when you create an environmental encounter, you want to give them something their skills can overcome, their plotting, their thinking, their tactical thinking can overcome, or they can use even use to their advantage as an option. It doesn't have to always favor the NPCs. I will say in an ambush, it should favor the NPCs, but this isn't really that. The harpies aren't incredibly intelligent monsters. What do they have? They have a 7 intelligence. Actually, they're within human range. They're not super smart, but they're smarter than a wolf, for instance. And wolves can be very bright when they attack. Anyway, I need to come up with something here that gives me something richer for the players to encounter. Excuse me, I always get my voice. All right, so these are cauldron caves in the wilderness, potential scenes in the wilderness, harpy encounter. So I need something that creates a sense of tension for the players. And what the core tension is the barbarian is standing in front of 3 harpies. The rest of the players are about 100 feet away, sleeping in the tent. So the out of the gate thing is I need some way to determine, do the players wake up? Of course they'll wake up, but how soon will they wake up? And what action do they have? So let me start out with that. Wake up. So that's an environmental encounter because it's situational. It's not really environmental. Now, typically when you do a wake up for a group, it's somebody, people assume it's sneaking up on them. So you roll an NPC's or even a PC's, but you roll somebody's stealth versus their passive perception -5. The -5 in D&D's represents, on a passive score, disadvantage. Alternatively, you can just give the other character advantage and let them roll against the passive perception. But either way, it's sort of irrelevant. So how do I do that? But how do you do this when you want to see how long it takes them to wake up, when they might notice something? So waking up would require what I could have the barbarian scream. What's the base level? So it's a DC, I'd say DC 10. That's about fair and easy. But again, 100 feet away in the middle of snow, which tends to dampen sound. So I'll say DC 10 perception roll each round for players to wake up. Oh, this is what I'll do. Players wake up. So there's sound of combat. There's a little bit of yelling, grunting. The harpies are screeching. I mean, they're going to wake up. It's a 50-50 per seconds. You know, if you've ever woken up from stuff, it takes you a minute sometimes to sort of come to your realization. If the barbarian screams or does something purposeful, takes some action, is active in alerting party, give them advantage. So yeah, I think that's an easy way to do it. So that's sense 1 stake. How long does it take the other players to wake up and encounter these harpies? Now let's see what the harpies are at. So the CR1 creatures, 3 CR1 creatures for my encounters. Let's see. If I go over to, I don't have any. What's new? Manage characters. Yeah, I don't. He's not in it, so let's hide him. So what I'm gonna do now is create a. Oh, they're level 3 characters, of course. So 3 CR3 harpies. I want to see what the difficulty is. So I'm gonna add them. I'll do 3, and that is a hard encounter. That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. That's a hard encounter for 4 characters at 3rd level. So I would say this situation kicks that up probably to deadly. Now I don't want this to be deadly. I want 2. So what I'll do? The harpies know there's players in that tent. So what will happen is 2 attack Store, who's the barbarian. 1 goes and sings to the tent. Sings. Does it need to do that? It could even burn the tent, which would be horrible. Boy, that could be quite an adventure. So what if it runs? What if it goes over and basically sets fire to the tent, and the players have to choose between how evil of a DM do I want to be? If the harpies set fire to the tent, this is the cold weather tent, so it allows the players to do a lot in this environment. They don't have to roll survival checks to sleep. They can actually sleep in cold weather. There's a lot they can do. If it sets fire and they lose this tent, it could be very detrimental to them. So two attack store, one goes for the players, but let me see on this harpy again. So it has this luring song. The harpy sings a magical. Is it an action? Yes, it's an action. So luring song is an action. It would wait until, so it has two actions. It basically set fire to the tent to force the players out of the tent. It's probably not smart enough to realize they'll wake up and come out. It's impatient, right? Because it has a average wisdom and low intelligence. So it'll set fire to the tent. It will, that's crazy. That's awesome. And it will cause the players to choose between putting the tent out or fighting the harpies and helping the store. So that's one of the things it will do. So let me make one attack stores, two attack store. One goes, it doesn't sink to the tent, sets fire to the tent. Because they've got a little small campfire going on. So the fire will begin burning. The fire should be minor, takes one action to just put it out. Put out, and that could be a spell or just somebody's beating it with a blanket or whatever. And once party is out, they begin. Once party is out, one will sing. All will attack whoever is incapacitated. Whoever incapacitated. All right. So what happens is the harpies sing. You're incapacitated while you're sort of spellbound by these monsters. You're charmed by it. And the harpies will attack whoever's incapacitated because that's their tactic, right? And it doesn't have to be all on one. It'll either as evenly as divided as can be. All right. So if there's 3 party members that are incapacitated from this, the harpies will attack each one of them. They'll get advantage. They'll be hoping to critical them, and it'll spread the damage out on the party itself. The last bit is, do I want to make it difficult to move, which I actually think I do. So I will say that the terrain is difficult because of deep snow. Now, I debated, I really debated whether I use, water here. That's something I don't want to overuse. I haven't used it yet. I have not used the threat of falling into the water yet in this adventure. I don't want to use it here because I'm actually saving it for the Cauldron Caves. So if you go here in this map, this is the Cauldron Caves map, which is fun, which is a great little map. All right, over here, this is Water Weird Adventure. By the way, small tip for virtual tabletops, if you have not used them, I just got a question. What's that light over here? This is a lighting effect that you can do in Foundry VTT. I've just set it up ahead of time, so if a players were, you can see there's you have this visual sight that you have. So if the players get here, they'll see around this cauldron this little light. I'm using the Frost Giant skeleton, which I'll get to my lore-based encounter thing in a second. But so if I get off of that, there's a water weird here, and there's a possible encounter that the players might come down here and crash into this. And I covered this in a previous stream. Again, this is an environmental base encounter. I'm going to have this water weird trapped in the ceiling and sort of flailing about. And there's actually it flailing and trying to get out of the ice will cause icicles and ice to crash down on the players, and they'll start to suffer damage from that environmental effect. So I'm taking the environment to use the damaging effect of this, but not making a combat encounter, because if they might realize if they free the water weird, it's going to run away. It doesn't have anything invested in killing the player characters. I think in the original module it's set up that way. If you just go there, everything tries to kill you. But that's, again, give context to an encounter. This water weird is stuck in this ice, unable to get out. And as soon as it gets freed, it's like an animal you free and just runs away. The real encounter is with the environment, with the crashing ice that comes down around it. The players might choose to kill it, but they might choose to set it free and realize it might run away. So anyway, I don't want to use ice-based encounters. I had considered with this ice crack, and it goes in it, and then they have to start making these survival checks if they're wet. I think that's cheap because this is already a very difficult encounter. I don't want to set... so that's another thing about environmental encounters. You want to think, like a chess game, you want to think a couple of encounters down the road. In this, if I were to do something like make the players fall through the ice, get wet, then they have to start making survival checks or constitution checks during a certain period of time, or they begin to suffer levels of exhaustion. Now, if I did that, knowing there's a super hard encounter coming up, that would be not well informed as a DM. So you want to sort of consider you can have two levels of things. Either, as I said earlier, either it's basically a long lasting effect that the players either have to mitigate for or manage or deal with the downside of, or it's an immediate effect, which means it affects the combat that they're about to get into. If I'd chosen to do something like that in this harpy encounter, that actually would be a decent that would be a decent encounter because the players are outside. They're not about to have another encounter. They can choose to rest. They have some agency to take some actions to mitigate. Let's say if I had one of them fall through the ice, or in this case, let's say they don't put out the tent fire. The tent burns up. Now they're unable to camp effectively out in the wilderness, and they have some problems. So that creates an option for them to go back to town, or they choose to push on forward to the cave or something like that. That creates some richness, some things for them to weigh options as a party and get into a debate about. Because at the end of the day, that's what you're doing as a DM. You're giving them things to discuss, to debate, to decide, to prioritize, to rank, to play their character out through. So none of this should screw them over. It should always give them a choice on what to do and make things more interesting. So, harpy encounter. They wake up. One of the players is in the middle of combat. They realize there's an attack happening. They realize their tent is on fire. They have some choices to make of, do they run 100 feet over to where this barbarian is? Remember, it's night. So they can, even with dark vision, they can only see 30 feet. I think it is 30 feet, right? Sometimes they get mixed up. Sometimes it seems like 60 feet. But they can only hear. They're going to have to make perception checks to find. Oh, I didn't include that. Ooh, this is great. Perception checks to find store at advantage, or half movement toward him. So what that means is they come out of the tent. It's pitch black because it's the middle of the night and it's nighttime all the time here. All right, sorry about that. I messed up my screen. And they need to locate store. That's another environmental factor. It's nighttime. They need to locate store. If you've ever been, and again, I was in the military, so I'll tell a story once. We were in a group that a snake came into. We were on a field exercise in the jungle. I was in Central America, and we're all in the middle, and the snake came into the middle of a big giant snake. And we all ran. We all ran off into the woods, and it took us like 45 minutes to find each other. And we didn't run that far, so the sound echoes weird, and you think you hear things. It's much more difficult to find each other in the dark because it was the middle of the night than you think it is. That took us like 45 minutes to find each other, and it's a big lesson for us. But so that's similar in the party. Now I'm not going to do 45 minutes, but a round or two might make a difference as players are being attacked. That creates another thing, because these things don't just apply to the players. Another consideration is what kind of perception. So the harpies, this is important. The harpies they don't have dark vision. So they themselves are at disadvantage in their own attack. So I'll have to look that up, but I think that could save the player characters themselves. They know where things are because they've been scoping the area out, but they it's at it might take them around extra to find each other, and they'll be at disadvantage in the dim light while they attack each other outside of 5 feet. So melee ranged attacks certainly will be, if you don't have dark vision, certainly will be at disadvantage. Melee attacks, if you're right next to each other, won't, but it'll be a little hard to find each other. So as I hope you can see, just in this one small encounter, we have a number of environmental factors that are stacking up to create sort of a much more rich environment that brings the party off to different places, lets them get lost from one another, make it difficult to wake up and realize there's something happening, give them a choice of, do I put the tent out, the fire in the tent out? Do I engage in this combat and save my compatriot? Those are all interesting things to do. So yeah, that's where, I think that's where it's at. Difficult terrain because of the deep snow. This is just a tactic I'm noting for the harpies. This is not environmental. So this singing to incapacitate the party. I'm just trying to lay out the tactics for monsters like this ahead of time. I think that's useful. There's this great series called These Monsters Are Smart or something like that. I wish I could remember the name of it. But it's a great book you can buy, and there's a website that's related to it that talks about tactics for different monsters and how they can use their abilities to the highest advantage. It's really great. So party's waking up, perception checks to find him. I misspelled store. Perception check to even find him 100 feet away. How the harpies will attack. All that stuff creates an interesting breakdown of how the whole thing goes. One of the things they don't want to do, by the way, is they have axe beaks with them. It might make sense for the harpies to attack the axe beaks and not the players because they're just hungry. They specifically want to kill the players. But one, they probably recognize the threat the players present. So that's something they might do. But two, you want to be careful about attacking players. This piece of DM advice. You want to be careful about attacking players' assets. So that goes back to very early in the stream when I talked about that potential of like putting an animal baby with them. Mounts. Like if you give a player a house, be careful about players attacking that house, because once you start attacking vulnerable assets of the players, they begin to turtle up. So they're reluctant to travel because they don't want to put their axe beaks at risk, or they're reluctant to leave their house because they don't want the villain burning down the house. The players tend to turtle up if you always go after these vulnerable resources. And as a player levels up, when you're 5th level, 6th level, 7th, certainly in tier 2, later in tier 2, a house is supremely vulnerable to someone at that CR range, where a player may not be at all. And they're just very reluctant. They turtle up and they're very reluctant to go do things. So be cautious about that as a GM. All right, let me talk about lore-based encounters here for a second. Now, I'm going to pull up GM Binder. Like a lot of GMs, I keep a GM Binder. You can see my email. GM Binder account here, but so if you go to my library, I'm working on something called Undead. The reason why I'm working on this, let me do, how do I take this away? What's going on here? I don't want to set variables. Anyway, let me just do this. So I'm creating a type of undead so the reason why I'm doing this is, let me go back here because I have actually, I think, all of it written here. So what happens is one of the player characters, their backstory is they're a wizard, and whenever they kill someone with a spell, they're a humanoid creature, there is a chance that creature will come back as an undead. It's something like 5%, quarter, 25% if they kill him with a regular spell. But if they kill him with a necromancy spell, something that causes necromantic damage, it's 100%, and they come back soon. So it's usually within an hour. So it begs the question of, well, why do undead exist at all in this setting? And again, going back to something I said at the top of the hour, D&D by nature is agnostic to setting details like that. It's not trying to tell you as a DM why things exist. It's just trying to set up what happens if they do. It's a part of your lore as a DM to create why things like undead exist. How does magic work? How do people learn magic? How does religion work? To set these sort of flavorful elements of the setting, that's on you as a DM. And a lot of DMs don't do it. Even if you get into Lost Minds of Phandelver, there's no opinions about that. They just kind of work. But I think that as a DM, even if you're running a established setting, let's say like the Forgotten Realms, that's what I'm running in this current campaign in, you're still stuck with homebrewing these whys. People want characters want to dig down into why. So the reason why why undead exist in the world, and then I get to why does the character end up with this curse? Because it's a curse. I had to sit down like, well, what causes undead to exist in the first place? And so I sit down a bunch of different types of undead. Now I'm going to write this as a supplement. I know I'm kind of weak on announcements, but I started a small gaming company. I'm going to be releasing supplements and modules coming up into 2021. One of the first two that I'm releasing are a supplement for undead, lore-based undead. That will be sort of reasons why, and opinionated reasons why undead exist in the world, and give them some abilities, and then talk about how they can how you can build adventures around these lore-based items to make it a little bit more flavorful than just walking into a room and have skeletons standing there. So I wanted to give several different reasons for undead to exist. So the first is the restless dead, as I call it, which is in the setting that I say, the dead rest peacefully as long as they're honored. But if they're dishonored, if they're desecrated, anything like that, if they're forgotten, they might raise in sort of this as vengeful spirits to either take revenge against the people that forgot about them or disrespected them. So what I might set an adventure around, players going, actually, I'll talk about it now. So I'm setting up one of the adventures that I'll publish early in 2021 is an adventure called the Star Tier Dungeon. And it's a play on words. It's supposed to be a starter dungeon. I want to create a great one-shot adventure that helps DMs work through it's like a tutorial that you might get in a video game that you might work through elements of play as you go into the dungeon and get different sort of set tutorials within each room. So to that end, I'm going to use this MacGuffin that a new dungeon, like a dirt slide, has revealed the entrance to an old tomb. Some of the townsfolk there hear that players are becoming adventurous, so they tell them there's a tomb that's been uncovered. Why don't you go look? They get into it, and there's different environmental challenges as they progress into the dungeon. There's no combat. They see this sort of rich tomb with these sarcophagi in them, and they can pull them apart. They'll see skeletons in the whole bit. There'll be different challenges in each room. So the first room will express difficult terrain to them. So with a flooded chamber, there'll be difficult movement, so they'll understand how difficult movement works. They'll have to push through some of the walls and break them down, so they'll have to do ability checks to do strength to get through them, and they might have to do ability checks, or saving throws to avoid falling debris from some of these walls as they come down. So they'll progress through with the different elements of advantage and disadvantages and ability checks, and it's just that style. It's just ability checks, skills, saving throws, and so forth to get into the dungeon. Once they get into the dungeon, they'll be presented with bunches of treasure. So if they pry the gems from idols' eyes and sort of rob the tomb, basically, then the undead wake up and want to take revenge on them. So it's combat coming out. So they'll have to re-go through the dungeon. Now the skeletons would have risen, and all those kinds of things will happen. So that's going to be the basis for that adventure. So that's on this Restless Dead piece. The lore of the Restless Dead is that if you steal things from their tombs, if family forget about them, that creates this sort of lore for why these undead might exist in the world, and why they're vengeful, and why they're coming after the living. And it can create additional follow-on stuff. Let's say they get out of the dungeon, go to the town, and leave. Then they hear about the dead rising in the area, taking revenge on the town for letting this happen. There's a reason for the players to go back. There's lots of lore-based items in here. The other thing is cursed undead. So that's like a headless horseman sort of legend. If in the U.S. there's this old legend called Headless Horseman, who was a Hessian soldier who lost his head, and he's cursed to harry people who come in along this road because he was a bad person. You can do the same thing. So you have like an evil character or someone who was maybe good that didn't live up to a promise, or some reason that they are cursed and their spirit is unable to leave the world. So you can stage all kinds of adventures around that. About maybe they might be harassing a family because they are the family. This was a family member of theirs was just dishonored their family, and they're cursed to tear apart their own family. Or there might be someone who's cursed to walk the earth because they were evil and they killed people in this world, and so they're cursed to never rest and always have to kill people, or something like that. You can build lots of adventures around that. Then there's the hungry dead, that these are spirits that are not spirits of people, but spirits that come from the Shadowfell that just hunger. So this is the vampire story. They either need to draw on life, but they can never be sated, or they have to acquire gold, or there's all kinds of adventures around that. The bound dead might be created by necromancers that are basically bind a spirit to some fleshly form or spirit form that keep them in this world as servants, and they yearn to be free. Maybe that's, and then pawns of false life, which are creatures that are imbued, that were never alive in the first place. So like shadows or things like that might be in this world, and they are sort of resentful of life itself. So if you have this lore-based reasons for undead to exist in the world, you can begin to create adventures around them and context to those adventures. So what I want for the player character here is they don't know this yet. They've just discovered that when they kill somebody with their spells, that these people sometimes rise as undead. And it's been great that, like, after a combat, they're going through everyone's pockets for loose change, as adventurers do, and suddenly someone will pop up and start strangling one of them, and it's created a little bit of excitement for them. So the backstory to this is when they were born, that a demonic soul from Orcus was grafted onto their soul. So they're basically the vessel for this demon to grow in them as they go. And once they die, this demon will be loosed into the world. But because of this necromantic energy associated with Orcus, when they kill somebody with their spells, they are able to it turns them into an undead. So the arc is eventually the player wants to kill this part of their soul that's a demon and be free of it. So I need to sort of come up with some reasons for this character as they go and investigate. And this is pawns of false life. It'll eventually be, they realize that there are ways for necromantic creatures to find their way into this world, begin to sort of they have to kill the living to maintain their life in this world. And that's what he'll realize over time. It also sets up this adventure that I have that's coming into Cauldron Caves, because over here, when you get into this is, I've covered this in a couple previous streams. This is a CR6 Frost Giant Undead. This is the thing that's going to have the shield that I talked about at the top. The player character's grandmother's shield, that's a family heirloom that's lost. It's going to have the shield with them. Now, I'm going to say in this lexicon of lore that this creature had been alive. It had actually been a frost giant when the player character's grandmother's party fought it, but has since been turned into a skeleton. So I'm going to use the cursed undead feature, where this thing is cursed somehow, unable to go into the afterlife. And I will say that it, with its dying breath, as its party killed it, it cursed them that it will not leave this world until it sees their line wiped out. So it can't leave, its spirit can't leave this world until it destroys the line of this party member's family. So it's going to obviously wake up when it gets there. It gives it a reason for it to be around. It's also going to imply a lasting curse that this spirit can come back as a disembodied spirit at a later date, harass the party unless the party takes on some sort of ritual to cleanse this cursed spirit from the world. And they'll have to. I'll create some adventure later on. It will probably serve Oriel when they get to the 7th level stuff, where they go end up fighting the goddess Oriel to free this area from the night. There'll be some version of this spirit after they, assuming they survive this encounter, there'll be some version why this thing is still dispatched from here, and they'll be able to go fight Oriel and get rid of it. That's great, because this creates for me several payoff adventures. I've already got from way back. I doubt you've joined me in all previous streams, but back in a encounter called the there's a dungeon encounter with a ghost, basically, where that ghost escaped after trying to possess one of the player characters, and it blames one of the player characters, the one I said has that Orcus spirit of Orcus grafted onto their soul. It is going to come back at some point, I think at about level 5, and revisit the party. And that's great because it creates a callback to a previous adventure. Try to take revenge on the party and attack them later on. And it'll create this sense of continuity for the world. This will do the same thing. If this spirit once they kill the skeleton, I should make a note of that. So once the player characters kill the skeleton of the frost giant, assuming they do, its spirit is going to leave the body. I want to have a narrative beat for a moment where it sort of rises out of the body and make some proclamation about frost giant skeleton. Make some proclamation about not being done with them. When dead, spirit rises, wails, and makes some proclamation about I'll figure it out later how I can do it, but proclamation of revenge. So I want to tease that this spirit is coming back later to fight them and let them know it's not over. Leave them with some like what just happened moment. And so when they kill this frost giant skeleton, assuming they do, it's going to rise from the body like steam. It'll look hungrily at the player character whose line it is to wipe out, and say something like, your spirit. By Frostmight, I will have my revenge still, or something like that. I'll make something up in a moment, or just before the adventure. But that will set the stage of why this creature is around. If the player wants to do some research, they can get in touch with clerics who can decide. Well, there are ways you'll have to find. If it's cursed, you'll have to find sort of the seat of its power. Maybe go after its family member or something like that. I'll create some MacGuffin later on that if players want to truly release the spirit, they'll have to do something. Maybe even actually attach it to Orreal to sort of, I want to incentivize. I'm trying to create hooks later on. So I want to create more and more hooks for them to go after Orreal rather than just, I want to save the region, which should be enough. But the more the reasons, the more hooks I can stack on top of it, the better. I'll also create the MacGuffin of, I want to put up here, so plot threads. I want to create a plot thread of, because if I create too many hooks, too many convenient intersections of story, so the player character with the soul of Orcus, I want to tie that to Orreal as well, that there's some way to cleanse that spirit from them by going to Orreal. If I make that this paladin player character can cleanse or remove this curse from their family, from this frost giant spirit by going to Orreal, it gets a little too convenient that there's an intersection of plot lines at this one place, unless you create a reason for there to be. So I will say that the god of the sun, god or goddess of the sun was is pushing the party along. So in Forgotten Realms, one of the lore elements is that most of the gods have gone up to the heavens and refused to directly intervene in the world. Orreal and a few of the other gods have chosen to stay in this world and interfere directly. So what I'll say is, and since Orreal is causing the sun not to rise in this area, that's going to be in direct opposition to the sun god. Or goddess, and I think it's a god, actually. I forget the name of it, but basically, so indirectly, I want to make this out that the sun god is manipulating things behind the scene to cause these people who are associated with it to come to this region to try to free them, because it makes no sense why they wouldn't be doing something. So I'm going to create that incentive and that MacGuffin. I don't know how I'm going to feed that. So the big question mark here is, how do I tease this? So I'm going to have to create some ability, the player character's abilities of, I want to give the player character some sort of ability. Oh, this is a good idea. Character some ability based on the sun. So there's 3 plot lines, and I don't have a 4th one yet because the 4th player chose not to do a background. But so the 3 plot lines are of player characters. I have one who's an ancestor of these guardians who guard the veil between worlds. I have another who's a player character with this frost giant whose spirit will come back against them. And I have a third player character who has this grafted demon of Orcus that's sort of growing in them like an egg, and causing. So all three will have some intersection at Auriel's dungeon at their palace that can set them free. The fourth player's backstory is really the reestablishment of the Harpers in Icewind Dale. I'll relate that somehow, but I don't have an idea quite yet. But I will create some special ability for each one of these characters to have. So one of the ways, we're really running across that hour right now, so I'll wrap it up here in just a few minutes. So I'll probably create a future stream on ways that I create special abilities for characters. Now, I like to keep it balanced. Balance is important to me, not because I like to hem in the player characters, but because if I have a balanced set of abilities, that lets me understand where the rails are, that if I'm going off the rails, I know it, which is important. But to know how to challenge the player characters effectively. Now, I want to give them a special ability, but one of the ways I tend to do that is I'll give them some use per day ability. And there used to be this concept in third edition called subdual damage, which you recovered those hit points a lot faster than you recovered your regular hit points. But I'll do something similar. Like there'll be some special ability that they take certain hit points because they have to put their life energy into an acting ability, and they roll like a D6 or something not too big, especially as they go up levels, but they lose some hit points every time they use this ability. I actually love that because this makes the players really debate, do I want to use this ability and how much do I want to damage myself to do it? The way that Dungeons and Dragons seem to be designing with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, they put a big flag in the ground by tying ability uses per day to your proficiency bonus, which is an interesting way to do it. It ensures all player characters get a number of times to use an ability per day, and it's about average. It doesn't vary by ability modifier or something like that. But that just gives them an ability over and above what they can do. If I give them an ability tied to hit points and they sacrifice hit points to do it, that lets them make a choice and a balance every time they use it. How much do they want to do it, and how much do they want it to cost them? And often, I've done this before in games. The interesting part for a game master is they end up overusing it and really taxing themselves. It really makes an interesting play because they can knock themselves out with it. Do they put themselves over on death's door? There's lots of things you can do with that ability. So I'll create that for a future session, and I'll create maybe additional party benefits. It'll be basically the equivalent of a new feat for each player character, but I'll come up with something later in a future stream to do that. All right, so what did we do today? I talked about the environment. I talked about the Harpy adventure. I didn't really get into the lore. I got a little bit into lore based for the Frost Giant encounter. Boy, I always end up burning up much more time than I originally thought. But I hope you can see that you can use environmental adventures to really create a much more rich and dynamic encounter where they can use movement abilities. They can use utility abilities. They start to exercise in-character judgment or tactical judgment to modify how the encounter goes with this Harpy adventure that I talked about. You can see with the Frost Giant encounter that I want to give more context of why does this thing exist other than to fight it? Why does this Frost Giant thing exist? Because it's a cursed undead. It's made a vow that it will wipe out the line of this player character's party, and it can't leave this world. So this player character can never be rid of it as long as her line is around, or I have to come up with some way that it can destroy the soul of this creature, and she doesn't have to actually worry about it and free her family of these future generations instead. So that's how you can use lore-based stuff to create additional rich encounters, or environmental-based stuff to provide additional rich encounters as well. I hope you'll consider that, and some resources I quickly want to point out, especially for environmental-based encounters. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything provides a lot here to consider. There's supernatural regions, there's magical phenomenon, there's natural hazards, avalanches, falling into water, falling onto a creature. There's this great long list of other effects that you might get for blizzards and earthquakes and floods, smoke. There's a lot that you can really begin to incorporate into your own adventures to create a more rich a more diverse and dynamic environment than just straight up rolling initiative and then seeing who can do more damage and who can last longer with their hit points. You want to take your adventure beyond that to make it more rich for the player characters and provide more story and backstory. Okay, great. Thank you for joining me today. As always, again, new channel. I've only been doing this, I think, a month now. I think I'm right at about the month mark, maybe a little bit more. But I hope you'll give this video and any other video a like. I hope you'll subscribe. I hope you do a thumbs up. You'll share it on your social media. If you thought there was anything useful, if you're on Twitch, you can go ahead and make clips of that. I would really, really love if people did that. It would help me grow this channel a little bit. This will always be a small conversation. But any help like that would be super, super appreciated. As of right yet, there's no Patreon, there's nothing like that. I just hope you'll help enhance the conversation. I hope you'll give me a follow on Twitter. I'm on all the social medias as optional rule. So I hope you'll go ahead and give me a follow there. Like, subscribe, thumbs up, all those bits. I hope you'll leave a comment too. I would love to engage you in conversation. You can comment on Twitter. You can comment on the video, whether you see that on YouTube. It doesn't really have a comment area on Twitch. But if you're able to participate in any of the future weeks, I would love to hear that as well. All right, so thank you very much for joining me today. I do this every week on Saturday at noon Eastern time. It's been enjoyable to do this week as it has every week. Again, my name is Optional Rule. Don't have a great outro this time, so thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. It was great to talk to you, and I hope to join in future weeks as well. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care until next week.